A lot of people have a lot of misconceptions when it comes to training to build muscle. One of them being that you got to do a lot of different exercises to promote growth. And the mentality there is that if I want to build as much muscle as possible, then I got to recruit and fatigue as many muscle fibers as possible throughout the entirety of the muscle. And that is correct. However, it's not necessary to do as many exercises as you physically can do to stimulate that response, to promote that response. So a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll join a gym, it's New Year's now, and they'll go in and they'll do every single exercise they can think of or that they see or whatever machines there are, and they'll just do them all. And then they'll think at the end, okay, you know what, that was probably a pretty good workout. Look how many exercises I did. I'm in a good position to build muscle and change my body, right? It's not the case. It's not the amount of work that you do, but rather the quality of work that you do. And if you overwork your body's capacity to recover, you're going to shoot yourself in the foot anyways. So a better strategy would be one where maybe you just did less exercises, but more quality work when doing those exercises. In fact, you only need really one exercise per body part to promote a shit ton of growth. 80-20. 20% of the movements will provide 80% of the possible returns. Now, what is going to promote the growth the most is the type of work that you do. So the amount of weight that you lift will facilitate what types of methods and techniques you can do to stimulate growth. And you only need one exercise to do all this shit. So one of the things I've talked about lately are different recruit and fatigue methods, some that are better for recruiting, some that are better for fatiguing, and some that can be used interchangeably. But I didn't provide any practical examples. So that's what I'm going to do here, is provide you with a practical example of how to use one exercise to recruit and fatigue a shit ton of fucking muscle, to put yourself in a position to build muscle so that you can maximize your return on investment of time and effort. So the first thing I got on this board, now in a perfect world, first off, this board would be a little bit bigger. I understand that is probably going to be very hard to follow, so I'll take you through it from top to bottom, and then I got a little practical example on the right there, and you should be able to follow with the visuals here. So the first thing is recruit and fatigue. From here we got 0% all the way up to 100%. That's called an intensity spectrum. The amount of weight that represents 0% of what you could lift, 50, 60, 70, 80, 100, 90 obviously as well. And I didn't put the, from 10 to 40 because that's just really fucking light. No one would ever really use that unless they had a very specific purpose, like doing plyometrics or something. Now in red there, 75 to 85%, that's generally the optimal zone you want to work within to build muscle or even get stronger. You can perform a lot of work in that zone without overworking your capacity to recover. And generally that zone, in layman's terms, is a weight that you can lift 5 to 10 times max. So that's the weight that's going to fall into that zone. Anything you can lift between 5 and 10 times. Now, there are 3 factors that contribute to growth: mechanical tension, muscle damage, and metabolic stress. Some examples are to subject the muscles to high levels of mechanical tension, you're going to want to go heavy. To promote muscle damage, high volumes of work, generally with heavy weights, or eccentrics, which is going to turn on mTOR, which is the gene responsible for turning protein in your body into muscle. Metabolic stress, training to failure if the weight is light enough. Once again, the intensity will facilitate that, because if it's so heavy and you can only do 1 or 2 reps, you're not going to accumulate a lot of metabolic stress. So you got to use the right weight to do so. You train to failure with the right amount of weight, you're going to increase local growth factors. So all of this can be done with one single exercise. In fact, there are specific benefits to sticking to one exercise that you might not be aware of. Number 1, fatigue facilitates recruitment. And number 2, rapid neural adaptation results in faster growth. So I'll talk about that real quick. When you do an exercise, every single rep you do will have 2 effects on the next rep. You'll either do the next rep better because of potentiation, the way your nervous system adapts to what you're doing. It'll be able to recruit more efficiently every time it has an opportunity to practice what you want it to do. Or it'll be worse because fatigue will start to limit you. Now, depending on what you're training for, you might want to stop your set before fatigue becomes a limiting factor. Or if the goal is to fatigue as many muscle fibers as possible, you're going to want to push through that fatigue to the best of your ability. And by doing so, what happens is when you're performing an exercise, when certain muscle fibers start to fatigue, the brain will start to recruit other muscle fibers to help contribute to producing the force to lift the weight. And if you use the same exercise over and over and over again, you're not only going to recruit, but you're going to fatigue a shit ton of muscle fibers as long as you choose the right exercises. Now, number 2, Rapid neural adaptation equals faster growth. When you start training, anything that you do, your nervous system is recording everything that you do because the body's always going to want to take the path of least resistance. So whenever you impose a demand, it's going to try to meet that demand by doing the least amount of work possible to survive. So it has enough energy stores to get through whatever it's going to be faced with. And it's going to do this by monitoring the movements that you do and becoming more efficient at doing them. When you do exercise after exercise after exercise, you're tricking the shit out of your nervous system. It's got to constantly adapt to what you're doing. Now, if you want to get very efficient at doing a lot of different exercises, then that might be a good thing to do, but you're not going to get super efficient because you're going to spread your efforts thin. If you're stuck to one exercise, what you do is you max out the neural adaptation. It can only get so good at doing an exercise, and the sooner it gets as good as possible at doing that exercise is when it has no fucking choice but to build muscle. And you'll do this better by focusing on one lift as opposed to a bunch of different lifts. Other lifts should be used to target any weak links in the chain that might be preventing you from excelling at whatever lift is best suited to recruit and fatigue as many muscle fibers as possible. So you stick to one lift, and those are specific benefits to doing one lift. And then from there, you want to follow a recruit and fatigue framework. And as long as you do anything within this framework, you can do whatever the fuck you want to promote growth. So some recruitment methods that you'd want to use at the beginning of your workout to activate muscles, to turn them on, to recruit them so they can be fatigued later, are as follows. You could try to do speed work using 40 to 70% of what you believe your max to be. So if you know you could lift 300 pounds, 150 pounds would be 50% of that. You lift that weight as explosively as possible. Your brain's going to perceive that the demand is very high because you've increased it artificially through your intent, and that's going to turn on the muscle fibers to be recruited or fatigued later. Other options would be overload methods, in which you try to exceed your current lifting capacities, where you do either partials, eccentrics, or isometrics using over 90% of what you could lift through a full range up to 120%. You could go even higher if you've practiced this before, but that's generally a good starting point for most people. Partial is very self-explanatory. Performing partial repetitions through the range in which you are strongest to overload the muscles and turn them on so they can be fatigued later. Eccentrics, you're stronger eccentrically than you are concentrically. You can lower more than you can lift, and by doing so, you're going to turn on more fast twitch muscle fibers, and if they're turned on, if they're recruited, they can further be fatigued. And in fact, turning them on will facilitate performance of everything else you do throughout the workout, because if they're turned on and they're capable of producing the most amount of force, you'll be able to lift more weight during your fatigue segment, and then that's obviously going to promote growth in its own right. Then isometrics, you actually don't even need any fucking weight for isometrics. You just press a bar into the pins in a power rack, into an immovable object. The intent is to overcome it, but you're not going to be able to. You shouldn't be able to. And if you're trying to overcome an immovable object, because the object is immovable, stability is enhanced, and therefore you can push harder than you would when trying to lift a weight through 3 dimensions, through, basically trying to lift a free weight. You have to account for stability. When you're trying to move an immovable object, you don't have to worry about that. You could just worry about exerting force, turning muscle fibers on so they can be fatigued later. From there, you got fatigue segments. So once you've recruited muscles, you want to fatigue them. Some of your options would be increase the volume, increase the reps, decrease the rest, subject the muscles to constant tension, never let them relax. You got to use a lighter weight to do that, because you can't do that with heavy weights. You won't be able to do many reps. And then from there, you could do intensity methods like drop sets, supersets, the rest pause, and you want to use anywhere between 50 and 85% of what you know you could lift. How do you know what you could lift? Well, you've either tested your max before, there's other max rep calculators out there, or since your capacity to perform at your best is going to vary based on the day. Some days you might be able to do more, some days you might not be able to do more. So what you would do is you work up to your daily limit, and then you base your percentages off that. So I'll give you a practical example of all these principles in play using one fucking exercise to stimulate growth. So here, I know the board is a little bit fucked up, but just follow me. So just inside the red here, we're going to segment the workout. So the first segment, you're doing isometrics. This is just an example. It's just one of the recruitment methods that were on the board. So in this case, we're using isometrics. 3 to 4 sets of 5 to 6 seconds of effort, pushing the bar into the pins for 5 to 6 seconds, exerting max effort to turn the muscle fibers on. Then you work up to your daily limit. Go to a 2 or 3 rep max. Do 2 or 3 reps at a time. Put on some weight, do 2 or 3. Put on more weight, do 2 or 3. Keep going up till you get to 2 or 3. Why not 1? Because the risk is not worth the reward. We're not doing this for strength. We're not doing this to showcase our strength or ego lift or prove to anybody what we can lift. We're just trying to find out what we're capable of on this specific day so we could base the rest of our work off of that. So if you're intending to get 2 or 3 reps, it's implied that you'll at least get 1, and therefore the likeliness of success is greater. Once you know what you could do, then we can use percentages to divide up the rest of the work. We're going to try to do higher volumes of work with a high percentage of the weight that you did to recruit and fatigue the muscles. 3 sets of 4 to 6 reps using 85 to 90% of what was achieved during the daily limit segment, which was segment number 2. Then segment number 4, we want to apply constant tension. 3 sets of 6 to 8 reps, doing them slowly, keeping the muscles engaged, using 70% of what was achieved. Then going on to a rest pause set, doing as many reps as possible with 50% of what was achieved. You rest 10 to 15 seconds, you do it again, you rest 10 to 15 seconds, you do it again, and you keep fucking doing it. The point is to fatigue the muscles, and you'll know when that's done because you'll say to yourself, wow, I'm fucking done. And there you go. You don't need to do a bunch of exercises to do that. In fact, if you look at a traditional bodybuilding type of workout, it follows a recruit and fatigue type of strategy or framework or blueprint, whatever you want to call it, in that, the typical chest workout would be like bench presses, 4 sets of 4 to 6 reps, incline dumbbell presses, 3 to 4 sets of 8 to 12, and then a pec deck or a cable fly, 3 sets of 12 to 15. It's a recruit and fatigue method using different exercises to do it, but I'd argue that you could get the same, if not better results by doing the same exercise, especially for people that are less advanced, so that you max out the neural adaptation and the body's left with no fucking choice but to build muscle. So, I hope that helps with understanding what is needed to recruit and fatigue, that you don't need a lot of fucking exercises to do it. You only need one, and as long as you pick the right one, I didn't really focus on that here, but you want to pick the right exercise. You're not going to want to pick an exercise that doesn't recruit a lot of muscle. 80-20. 20% of the exercises will provide 80% of the potential returns. Generally, you want to do barbell exercises. You can lift the most amount of weight. In fact, some of these methods aren't even practical if you're not using a barbell because you can't press dumbbells into the pins in a power rack. So use a barbell, bench presses, overhead presses, incline presses, squats, front squats, back squats, deadlifts, you name it. Stick to the barbell and you'll be in a good place. After that example workout there, if you want to do another exercise that targets what you perceive to be a weak link on your body, you could do so. But don't do the whole fucking workout again. You don't need to recruit. If you're just targeting another area of the same muscle, it's already recruited. Do one of the fatigue methods and you should be good to go. So, if you like this information, feel free to share it. Click the fucking button at the bottom. Subscribe to the channel. I'm going to keep fucking bringing it all fucking year 2016, baby.